So I'm going to kick off first with Mark Kramer, who's the co-founder and managing director of FSG, a remarkable company specializing in solving society's most challenging problems through catalytic philanthropic strategy and innovative approach. Prior to co-founding FSG, Mark had a successful career in venture capital. And I know, Mark, that innovation is a key, obviously the key factor in our discussions here. And I wonder what sort of innovations are needed so that businesses can create new models that can balance doing good business while creating real social change.
Well, it's a great question, and I think that there really are three changes that have to happen. And the first is that business needs to think beyond philanthropy. And I think many pharmaceutical companies are already beginning to do that. But they need to recognize that 75% of the growth in pharma worldwide is going to come from emerging markets. And the medicines that we have been developing so far, the distribution systems we've been developing so far, aren't really designed to meet the needs of those markets. And as long as we think of those markets as targets of philanthropy, we will not be seriously engaging in the innovation with the full resources of our company that's necessary to solve both the drug development and the distribution challenges. I think the second thing that's needed is for companies to be willing to address and overcome what they see as market failures today. That reaching low-income populations requires innovation in distribution, it requires innovations in packaging, it requires innovations in partnerships to enable companies to get past what seem to be market failures. And the example that comes quickly to mind is Novartis's Rogier program in India, where they've found a way to reach 42 million Indians in rural villages that had no access to healthcare treatment or pharmaceuticals before by tremendous innovations, and it's opened up a whole new market for them.
Now, Mark, I want to follow up because I know you've done an article with Michael Porter in Harvard Business Review talking about shared values. And one of the questions I want to touch on here is how do you go about creating the sense of shared value in a corporation?
Well, the idea of creating shared value is that companies can contribute to their profitability at the same time that they're solving social problems. And indeed, if Porter were here, he would tell you he thinks the greatest strategic opportunities for business in the coming decade are solving the world's greatest social problems. And we see tremendous examples. In fact, we've done a report, and there are a few copies outside, or it's at fsg.org, called Competing for Saving Lives, which has dozens of examples from pharma about creating shared value initiatives. It's a mindset shift to recognize that social problems are actually business problems, and that business has the tools to solve them at a scale and with a sustainability and a degree of innovation that government and nonprofits often do not have to the same degree.
All right, Mark, thank you very much. Let me bring in Dr. Seth Berkley here, who's the CEO of the GAVI Alliance, an organization he's headed up just as it started its 5-year strategy to immunize 250 million children in the developing world by 2015. Prior to GAVI, Dr. Berkley was with the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative and has had a career spanning work in more than 25 countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So he's had sort of far more operational experience on the ground in the developing world than many people here, of course. So very valuable for us to have that experience. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Berkley. When it comes to innovation, what tools is GAVI using to shape the vaccine market?
Well, thanks for the question. Let me first start, though, because I loved what Mark said, and I think that is the critical issue. And so if you look at what GAVI did, when I started working in this case, and you're right, I've worked mostly in the developing world, but I've also been on a lot of vaccine company boards and worked with the private sector as well, so I understand both sides. There was a sense that the developing world was ROW, and that we were focused as an industry on, low volume, high-priced markets. And of course, now the world has shifted, where growth has occurred has shifted. And what was interesting is that vaccines, which of course are the core of many of the changes that have occurred that our new president have said are a result of the fact that vaccines have affected so many diseases, were tools that didn't get out to the people who needed them. There was usually a 15, 20, sometimes a 25-year delay before those tools got out. What we needed was a new way of thinking about this, a model that would allow these vaccines to get to people who needed them without delay. And that's really what GAVI was about. So how did it do it? It created public-private partnerships. And to Mark's point, this is not about charity. This is about trying to change the curve, change the way we market, change the way we think of things, and in essence move the world towards a Ramsey pricing model that would allow for the very, very poor, basically, products at cost, and then an escalating to where they can afford to pay. And one of the reasons that innovation is important is that, of course, as one begins to produce vaccines from the beginning at much larger quantities, you reduce the COGS. And so you actually increase profit in your primary markets. And so you're doing good and doing well at the same time. It's the type of new model that Mark was talking about. So in innovation, we've not only worked on trying to get these new products out, but then work with companies to have them think of how to serve these markets. What do we need in terms of packaging? What do we need in terms of cold chain footprint? What do we need in terms of thermostability issues like that? And then the other side is, how do we bring innovation into the other aspects that are necessary? We heard in the film, innovation and delivery. How do we get it out to areas that really need it? How do we get the community engaged? Innovation and financing. We use the capital markets to smooth out donors' curves and use that to help us raise funds in new ways. We created an artificial market through an advanced market commitment. So many different tools in innovation, not just on the science side, but on the social side and economic side as well.
And I actually wanted to raise that point. It's a good point you made earlier about the issue of charity, because I know you and the GAVI Alliance, you don't really advocate any kind of straight donations, except in rare circumstances, conflict zones and so on, but you believe in innovative financial tools. And I'm wondering, how hard is that to adopt in the current environment, getting the new financial tools?
Well, first of all, on the donations, it's not that I'm against. I mean, Pfizer, with my previous organization, had a fabulous program. They had Pfizer Fellows. They gave us some of their best people for a year or two to help work on our problems, and then they went away refreshed and excited. That, to me, was an example of really good, call it philanthropy, call it social growth. I would argue we both got a lot out of that. The reason we don't like philanthropy is not, of course, we'll take donations. The issue is, corporations' job is not to be a philanthropist. It's about making money for their shareholders. And the challenge is to create sustainable solutions. So maybe a donation can jumpstart something, but what we really have to do is work on those sustainable solutions. Your question on innovative financing, these tools are obviously more difficult at a time of fiscal crisis. On the other hand, they also allow groups to step forward during a time of fiscal crisis that don't have the capital available. So the fact with the IFPMA type program that you have a 20-year commitment, you can make a small commitment over 20 years. That can be front-loaded, so we can use it today if necessary, or in the middle or later. It allows the flexibility that if you didn't have that type of system, they couldn't operate it.
All right, thank you. Caroline Roan is the president of the Pfizer Foundation and has heard every Viagra joke going, so I'm not going to go there, don't worry.
Thank you.
But it's also a foundation which has made addressing social issues a major part of its corporate mission. Prior to joining Pfizer, Caroline Roan was working at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, focusing on community health, and we're glad to have you here with us as well. And let's explore the role of pharma in addressing public health issues and how you see that changing. For example, how has Pfizer leveraged its core innovation capacity to address social needs historically?
Sure. Well, first I want to thank IFPMA. It's been a great meeting, and I think this is a terrific panel, and I hope we get into the battle about philanthropy a little bit later. But to answer your specific question, if you look back at the industry and at Pfizer, we actually have a really rich history of responding to public health need. And I'll tell you a little bit of a history story, and I promise I won't take you through every part of the 160-year history of Pfizer. But we were founded by two cousins. One of them was a chemist, and one was a candy maker. And their first real innovation was taking a deworming medication that children didn't want to take because it tasted bad, and putting it in a candy cone. And voila, we had one of our first really innovative medicines that went to the heart of a public health issue and addressed the fact that no one wanted to take that medicine. Fast forward 50 years, we had a miracle drug in penicillin, and everybody knew it, but we didn't have the ability to mass produce that drug. And Pfizer had a specialty in deep tank fermentation. Now, don't test me on this because I would fail, but suffice it to say, we were able to increase production of penicillin 5 times the amount that had been produced, allowing us to take that penicillin ashore with Allied soldiers during World War II. A huge issue at that time, and frankly, we shared that very readily with all of our peers. Fast forward again, and you see the industry stepping up to take on neglected tropical diseases using medicines like Zithromax. All of our companies have very similar programs, but recognizing the power of the medicine and a comprehensive public health strategy to take on a real public health need.
And I'll touch more on how, what are the drivers for social change
Sure.
A little bit later. But let me bring in Rogier Snijdewind, who's one of the senior members of the team for responsible investing at PGGM, a leading Dutch pension administrator with roots in the healthcare and social work sectors, managing about 125 billion euros. Rogier described himself as a realistic idealist, which I can relate to because I say I'm a pragmatic idealist. And we're glad to have you here too with us. Now, there's a greater move, especially in the developed world, for more responsible investment. And I wonder how does that fit in with the pharmaceutical sector, in your opinion, and how do investors align their interests with those of, pharmaceutical companies?
Well, I guess the main issue is that we have, on one hand, we're part of this, part of the problem, I would say, given there's a lot of investors that have that short-term view, while we try to be more of a long-term investor and taking these matters into account and considering it to be part of the long-term viability of the company's business. With regard to philanthropy, I must add, from an investor point of view, that is indeed also not the preferred option. Just want to have that noted. But nevertheless, it's one way of taking things a step further. I think with regard to innovation, if you look at product innovation, I think as was mentioned before, the packaging, the way of delivery, also the fact that in some cases, making sure that that there is innovation with regard to the product, as in it being, how should I say this? Well, you don't have to cool it, for instance, in order to have that medicine. On top of that, there's the what I would like to refer to as a geographical innovation, just looking beyond the markets that are known. It's always hard and dangerous, well, it feels dangerous, of course, to tread, to go into new territories. I think for long-term value, that's definitely something that not only pharmaceutical companies, in all honesty, I think all companies that we invest in, there are quite a few of them, should look into and should be prepared to. And lastly, I think that the business innovation is something that's also been addressed. That's actually the bad thing about being the last one on the panels today. The fact that you consider the old model of blockbuster drugs being the primary profit driver, and then look into other ways of making money for the long run.
So it's not just about breakthroughs, it's about using the tools you have now and using them more creatively. That's what you're...
Exactly, and also it's, in all honesty, it's part of our own responsibility to ensure that it's not only us, but other investors as well. There's a great engagement opportunity for us there, for the investment community, to ensure that that all investors, or at least more investors than nowadays, are able to understand that long-term profitability can be helped by being by increasing access to medicine, for instance.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So there you have the perspective of our panelists, and I do encourage you to ask your questions and offer comments as we've reached the last panel of the day, and it's your chance to take part here again. If you put your hands up clearly, I'll get the microphone to you, and please tell us. We have a question already at the back there, so we'll get you the microphone. Thank you. Tell us who you are and where you're from as well, please.
Hi, sorry, my name's Amy Diedrich. I coordinate the civil society constituency of the GAVI Alliance, which is over 200 civil society organizations from all around the world, the majority of them being in developing countries. I just wanted to thank all of the panelists that have intervened today. It's been extremely interesting and I feel very high quality. A number of panelists have mentioned accessing public funds to finance drug research and innovation. I'm just wondering, what are the implications for intellectual property rights of using public funds? And ethically, is it appropriate to ask the public to pay twice for pharmaceutical innovation, especially when it becomes profitable?
Okay, perhaps Mark Kramer, I could get you to touch on that first.
I was afraid you were going to.
You look like you're thinking about it, that's why.
I am indeed. I think that the public good that is generated by creating new, powerful, effective drugs, and for that matter, the distribution systems, is of great value to society. And I see no reason why government should not be in the business of helping to fund and subsidize that. When you raise the question of whether public dollars should be used to help launch profit-making enterprise, I think you appeal to what I hope is an almost old-fashioned distinction. The notion that social problems can only be solved by nonprofits or government, and that if you're making money, you're not part of the solution. And I think that today there is an increasing sense that business is and must be part of the solution. And the magic of having a profitable model is that it is sustainable and scalable in a way that nonprofits and government programs often are not. And so I actually think that philanthropists often achieve a greater return on their money if they invest it in for-profit options to address social problems. And the same, I think, is true of government investment.
Rogier, can I get your input on this too? Looking at the position where you have a lot of clout with that kind of 125 billion euro fund, and also your expectations of the public sector in supporting what you do as well. Is there any expectation?
Well, we try to, as an investor, we try to step in where necessary. Well, apart from that, I do believe it's also part of the responsibility of investors, but also of the pharmaceutical companies themselves, to try to engage with governments worldwide and try to bring that to another level as well. I think now it's quite often the case, not in all cases, and I must admit that I'm pleasantly surprised by the conferences up until now as well. I think a lot of times there's this wait and see attitude, and it's up to governments to go to pharmaceutical companies to drive that innovation. Well, I think it could be the other way around as well. I think corporations can be part of the solution.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems there's more of a move for all sectors to collaborate more. That seems to be a key phrase here as well, so that's kind of encouraging. Dr. Berkley, you wanted to add something, sir?
Well, I just wanted to say that already there is massive investment. I mean, the NIH alone is $29 billion a year. If you look at investments across the world in public research agencies, philanthropy, others, there already is massive investment into these types of efforts. And I think, as Mark has said, the most interesting partnerships that now are occurring are not only small company to large company, academic institutions to large companies, and then, of course, now product development partnerships would bring public and private together. So it is all getting mixed up. What all that means at the end is that there needs to be a social contract at the end that says that there is a focus on not only getting the products out to the populations that can pay for them, but also to the populations that can't, and in that one needs to work on different mechanisms and ways of doing it.
Caroline?
So just to jump into the discussion, I think it's obviously critically important, and we've seen all day today the role of multiple partners in addressing these social issues. However, the role of the innovative pharmaceutical sector in driving and delivering the treatments and cures cannot be dismissed. And I place my bets in that industry. Obviously, I represent it, but I'm grateful for those contributions every day. Increasingly, we recognize the role and the power of partnership on research, and I think you see that reflected in a number of the partnerships that are being developed, not only within Pfizer, but across the industry. You see it in WIPO research. You see it in a number of different innovative approaches. But I feel strongly that we must recognize the billions of dollars that the industry invests every day in discovering and developing drugs that are going to make a significant difference in people's lives.
Do you feel there's a sense of the spotlight being taken off the pharmaceutical industry and being focused in other areas and people not really realizing what the big pharma does?
I worry a bit like I do around the conversation of the philanthropy that we will lose sight of that. Now, we cannot diminish the importance of other partners, and we recognize that, and I think there's a genuineness of that, both with the industry as we take on, the science gets more complex. It's going to be harder to solve the next treatments and cures. We have to think about the access proposition earlier in the development cycle. So absolutely, that's consistent across the board, but I do think that we need to recognize the power of each sector in delivering that social contract around health and wellness.
Another question from one of our participants. Thank you for your patience, sir. Tell us who you are, where you're from.
Hello, thank you. Yes, my name is Richard Lanane and I work here in Geneva for the Biological Weapons Convention at the United Nations. To shift the focus a little bit, I'm very, very interested in this idea of industry being a societal partner, not just through philanthropy, but rather taking on directly what's previously been assumed to be the roles of governments and NGOs and so on. And in my field, we're mainly concerned about the risks associated with biology, that the advances in biotech might be misused or abused deliberately, or that there might be accidents, leaks, mistakes, and so on with potentially very damaging consequences worldwide. I wanted to ask the panel, and perhaps particularly Mark Kramer and Caroline Roan, do you think there's a role directly for industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in working to minimize or address those risks? Thank you.
Okay. Perhaps Mark Kramer, you could take that first, sir.
Sure. I think there is a role, both out of a sense of survival for the industry itself, in trying to control the risks that it is exposed to, and also because the challenge of ensuring safety is itself a business proposition. There are indeed opportunities, I would suspect, to make money by finding more secure ways to create and manage biotech innovation. And so, yes, I think there is a role for business there, both sort of playing defense and playing offense as well.
And Caroline, your addition to this as well, please.
Well, I would echo what Mark said. There's a role for business from our perspective. I think in most aspects of this. Pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of time managing risk. There's a lot of risk that goes into our development decisions, obviously, in terms of bringing medicines to market. I think, though, interestingly, as Mark and I were talking about coming up on stage, there is this movement broadly into social enterprise, into B Corps, into these different iterations of the corporate form, which I think is interesting to watch, and it'll be interesting to see how the industry seeks to partner with those types of organizations as we take on additional challenges and risks.
And if I can just add, this is not to say there isn't a role for regulation or for activist organizations in a watchdog function. I think that is necessary too.
Well, let me bring in Rogier here and ask about the access to medicines too here, because this is, I know, a key concern for you is the need to focus a lot more on access to medicine, not just on the creating of new tools.
Yeah. Well, for us, we've been very active in this field for quite a few years now already. And, well, for us, it's part of, first of all, let me just illustrate this by a short story. When I was 8, back in 1986, a long time ago, so it feels, there was this big famine in Africa, in Ethiopia to be exact. And, well, this, of course, at the time made quite an impact. But if you consider, and I heard this recently, if you now consider and take into account the fact that I recently heard that 1/3 of the African population is actually at risk to become obese within the next few years, that's a whole other side of that field. So it's a complete turnaround. And I think the medical or the pharmaceutical sector can actually jump onto that and actually not. And I believe that we're to blame again, mea culpa. We're to blame for that as well to a certain extent because we tend to focus on risks. Even the more environmental driven or social responsibility driven investors focus on risk quite predominantly. Well, I think there are opportunities as well, also from a business perspective. And I think in order to have that long-term license to operate, I think it's really important that pharmaceutical companies actually jump onto this, opportunity, so to say.
Well, I want to bring in Dr. Seth Berkley here and ask about that as emerging markets develop and the developing world starts to see the diseases of wealth come in, of course the focus changes too, doesn't it, for how and where action should be taken?
Well, I wish I was 8 years old at the time of the Ethiopian famine. I actually was, working behind enemy lines by camel, doing work on nutritions there. And it's interesting because the parts of the world I was, if you go back there today, still have the same famines. And so although it is true that obesity is a risk, there still is the risk of famine, and the risk of famine is as much one of obesity. So we have to deal with both of them simultaneously. It's not a shift, as people say, it's dealing with both. I think what's interesting is we have to also change the dialogue. You know, we use the term non-communicable disease. Well, two of the biggest interventions, the single most important intervention GAVI's done in its saving 5 million lives in its first part of its life, was in getting rid of a liver cancer, right? That's seen as a non-communicable disease, but in fact it's caused by an infectious agent. Today we're trying to roll out vaccines against cervical cancer. And I think we have to keep this in mind in prevention as a strategy, because although treatment is critical, and obviously in diseases of lifestyle, more and more treatment is becoming the way to do it, to try to get those out to the largest percentage of the population, prevention has to be the first part of our ways of working. I just want to say one other point to a previous comment, and that is, as we're thinking about the shift in the role of industry, and I agree there needs to be regulation as well as responsibility, one of the critical issues for me is as industry shifts from the large companies, let's call research-based, to generic companies, to southern production, quality assurance, quality control becomes a critical issue. These companies bring enormous supplies to the world, cost reduction, innovation and low cost, but if quality problems occur there, they affect everybody worldwide in their confidence. And so one of the goals IAVI is trying to do is make sure we have a healthy vaccine market, not just the least price, but one that has healthy competition, but adequate profits, even for the generic manufacturers, so they can invest in quality assurance, quality control, because that's critical to what we do.
Excellent, thank you, sir. We have another question from our participants. Where is it?
Thank you. My name is Charles Gore from the World Hepatitis Alliance. Just to seg into what you were just saying, it's a hepatitis B vaccine that you were referring to. I just want to tell you a little story. We were very involved in advocating for a WHO resolution on viral hepatitis, which we succeeded in getting 2 years ago. And that established World Hepatitis Day as an official WHO day. And it's actually only the fourth disease-specific awareness day that WHO has adopted. And we'd been running it as a community day for 3 years prior to that. And once the resolution was adopted, I said to WHO, well, I think for next year, when it's an official day, we should partner with you in this. And and they were like, yeah, okay, we'll think about that. And about 3 months later, I got an email back from the ADG in question saying, well, we considered this, and we understand that you have some pharmaceutical industry funding, and we feel that we cannot manage the PR risk of being seen to be publicly in partnership with you. And the reason I bring this up is because I think that what your chairman was saying earlier about all the great things that pharma has achieved, I think you've been very bad on the whole at communicating that. And I think that when you're talking about building trust, one of the key things that you need to do is to communicate better. And I think that one of the ways that you need to do this, if I may be so bold as to suggest it, is to be a lot more proactive in what you're doing. And I would like to ask the panel how they think the pharmaceutical industry could be more proactive in order to get out the message that you do care about what happens to individual people, not just about money.
Before I get to Dr. Berkley, I want to get Mark Kramer's perspective on this, because we're talking in this session about societal partners. And of course, it sounds like a horror story to say, well, we can't go into partnership because it doesn't suit a certain image or need. I just want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I think the pharmaceutical industry has a deep hole to dig itself out of. But I think the way to dig itself out is not through public relations or even philanthropy, though that is important, but through really demonstrating proactively achieving results, achieving impact. I mentioned this Novartis program a minute ago, and it involved Novartis hiring 300 healthcare educators to go out into these villages to teach basic health-seeking behavior that these uneducated villagers did not have. It involved them training hundreds of healthcare providers who had actually no healthcare training. It involved them setting up a distribution system to 50,000 local clinics to actually be able to get the drugs reliably out there. And they have created a healthcare infrastructure that is enabling tens of millions of people to have access to healthcare they didn't have before, and done it in a way that government had not chosen to do, and that very few NGOs would have had the scale or commitment to do. I think it's by those kinds of programs where you can point to the benefit you're delivering that otherwise would not be delivered to people in need, and you can do it profitably.
Before I get to Caroline, I want to get Dr. Berkley's input in this, and I'll give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, so I would agree, and I use slightly different examples, but on the GAVI board, we have the large pharmaceutical companies sitting there on a seat. We also have the developing country manufacturers, and we're proud of it. It's part of the partnership. And sure, there's conflict that comes out from time to time. We manage the conflict as one does, but to try to have what we do without having those partners there would be a crazy thing. And so I think we have to change the conversation. But I agree, the way to change the conversation is not through PR. I mean, we were having over lunch a discussion on this. I am not a fan of direct-to-consumer advertising because I think what it does is it says the wrong message to everybody. And I think the more we have real demonstrated examples of us working together and having win-win situations for both, the more likely we are to get the pharma industry back where it belongs, which is not with the tobacco industry, but back to being, one of the most respected industries, saving people's lives.
Caroline Roan, thank you for your patience.
Sure. So I think my perspective is echoing much of what you said, but just to remind people that when I'm asked what Pfizer's social purpose is, I say it's our business purpose, to discover, develop, and bring to market life-saving, life-enhancing medicines that really allow you to live your life to its fullest capacity. And I think somewhere along the way we have lost that belief by a number of stakeholders and patients. And there is work to be done to rebuild that. I tend to fall into the camp of creating impactful partnerships and really focusing on driving innovation in that core. If we deliver new medicines every year that make a difference in people's lives, that will help the situation. We also need to partner more effectively, focusing on impact, and have our partners tell that story. But it's an appeal to the broader group of stakeholders to say that I think we're facing huge scientific hurdles, lots of social issues, government failure, and we're really not in a position anymore to say this organization can't be at the table. Because it's going to take multiple organizations and multiple perspectives to really solve some of these very, very challenging issues that we all face.
Thank you. I want to bring in our next participant who's been waiting for a microphone. Thank you.
My name is Tapan Ray. I'm from India. Being a societal partner for the industry is very important. And there are many initiatives where perhaps in bits and pieces, some components of the industry is becoming a societal partner.
A little closer, sir. Yeah.
But there are some global initiatives where perhaps industry could participate a little bit more. Let me give an example. WHO has set up Millennium Development Goals. And in Millennium Development Goals, it includes child mortality, which includes primary vaccination and other vaccination, maternal mortality, HIV, So when this is a global initiative for the developing world, for World Health Organization, by not formally associating itself with such initiative, don't you think that industry has lost an opportunity?
Okay, interesting question. I'm going to actually get Rogier Snijdewind first to talk about this. When there are parameters that have been set, and we accept that they are, say, globally set parameters, how much do they provide a focus for you in the work you do in targeting the right kind of changes that you want to see enacted?
Well, for us, it's a part. Part of the, and I just want to brush up on that. What was mentioned earlier, just before. I think part of the problem in many occasions is that the affiliation, for some reason, and that goes both ways, is considered to be detrimental. So NGOs do not want to talk to certain companies, and the other way around. And this is actually a broader problem that happens in many different sectors. We believe that in order to take that step forward, well, of course, that step has to be taken by one to begin with. But it's really important that it becomes part of the overall strategy, that access, but also other matters, is included in the business strategy, and I always refer to this as the board being on board, so that the board of directors is also considering this to be of the utmost importance. And there are some companies, and I won't name them, but they probably know who they are, that are doing that and taking that next step. And there's some that are, well, hopefully trying to make up for the lost time, and will follow shortly. But
okay. Well, let's get the pharma perspective on this too, then.
So I would argue that the industry and specific companies actually have been very much a part of the dialogue around the MDGs, either directly or indirectly through our partnerships. I think that when we have a global map and a global goal, it's useful for all groups because there's something to work toward and to measure, and it gets back to the conversation around impact. So IFPMA has been at the table on this issue, our industry association in the United States. I know Pfizer has been actively involved because the MDGs were clearly articulated. And I think one of the challenges when you define sort of the S space or the social space is measurement and impact and being able to cut across a number of different individual company initiatives and roll that up. So I would just suggest that there are many examples of how we have been actively engaged in the MDG conversation. And those types of action planning can be beneficial for all groups as we take on public health challenges.
Mark, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the MDGs are truly an important set of goals. But when we think about what a company can do to create shared value, we think about what are the unique skills and capabilities and resources that company brings. And where are there opportunities that align with its business strategy? And thirdly, where is an important social issue? Because there are so many important social issues of which the MDGs are a set, but only one set. And the question we ask is, where can a company achieve its greatest impact to social benefit? And for some companies, it will be in pursuit of one or several of the MDGs. And for other companies, their greatest potential for positive social impact is on a different issue. And in that sense, we believe in being rather neutral about the relative importance of the many different issues out there, and instead say, where can this company do the most?
We had a hand go up there. Yeah, there we go. Got the microphone. Good.
Ayham Al-Umari from International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent. Very interesting day and discussions about different areas around partnership, public, private, and people here, innovation and research, and lately also to talk more and more about investment. But my question is about, are we serious in our investment in innovative, non-traditional partnership? And this is an investment, if this is a solution we are looking for sustainable, or sustainable solution to global health needs. Are we serious in this investment, or is just evolutions here and there, and so some trials here and there? And what's the role of the industry, the public, and the private, and people in these areas?
I'm going to ask Mark Kramer to take this one first because you've specialized in helping companies to change their approach? And how realistic is it? Is it a phase? Is it, or is
No, I don't think it's a phase. If you really want to profitably reach these low-income populations and middle-income populations, you need a set of skills and a set of partnerships that most pharmaceutical companies do not have today. You need partners who have insight into the needs and the culture of the populations you're trying to reach. You need partners who have insight into the implementation strategies that will work in these communities and under these economic circumstances. You need partnerships with funders who can provide incentives and advanced market purchases and subsidy for research and other things for initiatives that would not be purely commercially viable on their own without some degree of subsidy. And you also need to work with government to set the right context and the right policies to enable this. So we see these partnerships as absolutely essential for companies that want to create shared value. No way around it.
And I want to ask Dr. Seth Berkley here about that. Do you see this as a fundamental change, long-term positive change through these kind of partnerships that Mark is talking about?
Absolutely. So, 20 years ago, there was suspicion. There was, if you talk to an NGO, it was suspicion both ways. I mean, pharma would say, well, you're just trying to take away our IP. And by the way, on the organizations like WHO, we have to remember those are member state organizations. The member states set the priorities there. That's why new innovative organizations like GAVI have been set up to allow a freer and easier public-private partnership engagement. But I think all of these things are being blurred. We don't have it right yet. And I think that's what's important. So pharma's trying new experiments. Should they set up their own institutes using their intellectual property? Should they partner with other groups managing that, like PDPs or groups that are trying to manage intellectual property? We had a relationship when I was at IAVI with Eli Lilly and their, Innocentive, where they had an internal way of bringing innovation forward that turned out to be very valuable for the private sector, but now for the public sector. So I think what we see now is a new world order emerging. And we're in the chaos of trying multiple different experiments, not knowing always which one is going to work. But I think it's here to stay because, as we said a little bit ago, the only way to solve these big problems is not going to be one sector. It's going to be a collaboration of many different sectors coming together.
And Caroline Roan, I want to get your perspective on this. Are you seeing a fundamental change?
I do think we're at a crossroads for healthcare for a host of reasons. But I think that the gentleman's question gets back to a conversation we've had around language. Historically, we've used the term wild and free public-private partnerships, and it really hasn't had a clearly defined understanding among all the parties. So that I think there's some skepticism, frankly, within the global health community, whether it comes from industry or whether it comes from civil society groups, that this new sense of urgency to work in partnership will be meaningful. So I think we're there, I think it's true, but I can recognize that there may be some skepticism behind that because we have used those terms so loosely before.
Now, we've talked about various drivers today that are pushing the partnerships and the results of these partnerships and how tools are being created, new tools and new alliances are being created. But Rogier, let me ask you about the issue of accountability. And I wonder, to what degree do you feel a company's license to operate should be linked to sustainability models within the company?
Well, just to get back to your earlier remark, I do think that companies they're part of society, but their primary goal is not to serve society in a non-commercial way. I do think eventually that if you look at matters in the long run, and I think that, the theory of shared value actually points out to that, you have to be there for the communities in which you're present. And I must say again, I'm pleasantly surprised by the conference up until now because there seems to be a lot of dedication. I think that in the long run, these opportunities will only arise to those that actually take that step now and see the commercial value of being present in many countries that seem very unappealing now.
Well, as we've got literally 5 minutes left, I want to see if there's any more questions. And I'll take a last question perhaps. If not, I want to try and give each of you a minute perhaps to sum up where you see this sort of final stage of our discussion on innovation and how partnerships and innovation will develop in the next say, decade and how you see the scene changing for the way you operate within the coming decade. Perhaps, Dr. Berkley, you could start with that.
Well, I think, as I said, I think we're in a transition time, and we talked about the transition time between industry and other partners, but there's also a transition time between a very dominated northern, using, in a geographic sense, industry, and now a growing industry in the BRICS countries and other places, which up until now haven't been as innovative, but are investing more and more and will be doing that. So the whole marketplace is going to be changing, and I think the challenge for us in this is how we end up making sure that the new innovations that occur end up getting focused on the people who need them the most, because it isn't naturally going to occur, and yet in new business models it actually might be to business's advantage, and I think it is to business advantage to do it. The challenge then is how we experiment, how we get those sustained for all of the groups engaged.
And Mark Kramer, presumably you're prime, obviously, in shepherding this change.
Very much so, and I'm struck from the comments by Sir Alan last night and the theme sort of throughout the day around the importance of access, not just the discovery of drugs, but access. And I think access is about logistics, it's about distribution, it's about financing, and these are fundamentally things that are discovered and figured out by business. They don't come out of laboratories. And I think we need to recognize the capacity and skill of business to figure out how you distribute, how you finance, how you provide the access, and then tap that through business models to really scale it up.
Caroline Roan, looking ahead a decade from now, what do you see as the fundamental changes through innovation?
Well, from my perspective, I think we are living in quite interesting times. And I personally believe that the pharmaceutical industry needs to deliver on our purpose, which is discovering, developing, and bringing to market new medicines. And we have to do that with more creativity, with more partnerships, and we do need to be mindful of the complexity of the access conversation and our role and where it starts and where it stops, and ensuring that all patients have access to the most innovative medicines.
Rogier, Snijdewind, you get the final word on this, where you see things developing with innovation.
Well, maybe I should say where I hope it should go. Okay. I'm not sure whether it will be, but that's the realistic idealist, I guess. I hope that in due time, and maybe 10 years, hopefully shorter than that, I think we'll gradually have a shift, as was mentioned before, it's a great term, the paradigm shift, not only with companies, not only with pharmaceutical companies, but also with investors, that for long-term profitability, this is just crucial in order to ensure that that pharmaceutical companies keep having the returns that they have now, and will actually become global players in a society that is becoming more global as well.
Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for our panel. It seems one of the key things that's come out of this is that, it is a time of change, and I worry when I hear about change, because I always think back to a story a few hundred years ago on this old British galleon with all these British sailors, and the captain called the men together and he said, men, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is, after 3 months at sea, we're going to have our first change of underwear. So they all cheer, change of underwear, thank goodness at last. He says, well, the bad news is, James, you changed with Edward. Edward, you changed with Horatio.